Welcome to this new automotive news video for Sunday, May 31, 2026. And to wrap up this week of news, we're going to talk about used electric cars which are still having a hard time selling, about the curse that continues for Jaguar's first all-electric car, and Alfa Romeo, which is once again delaying the arrival of two of its most important models. I hope the topics I've chosen for you for this last video of the week will interest you. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for the next videos, boosting this one, and of course, by leaving a comment where you share your opinion on today's news. We've been told for years that electric cars are the future and that the used electric car market will inevitably take off one day. We thought it was going to happen now with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the increase in fuel prices, and the radio and TV channels kept repeating that the French rushed to dealerships to buy an electric vehicle, whether new or used. In the new car market, for now, there hasn't been a spike or explosion in the market share of electric cars. We're still around 25%, which isn't bad compared to last year. At the same time last year, we were more around 20%. At first glance, the rise in fuel prices hasn't really pushed the French to buy new electric cars. What about now in the used car market? Well, first of all, it's true. We have to say it. Drivers' interest in used electric cars is increasing because last March, when prices started to rise sharply, searches for electric cars on different platforms like Le Bon Coin or La Centrale actually went down, a jump of 91%. That's a very strong increase in searches, which might make you think that used electric cars are finally in high demand. Except that's not really what the market numbers show. Because despite rising demand, selling an electric car is still particularly complicated, both for professionals and for private individuals. On average, in March 2026, a used electric car on the market waited 101 days to be sold. That's still better than the 108-day average recorded in January 2026. That means it actually stays in stock for a shorter time. There's a faster turnover, so there are still more customers for used electric cars. But it's still much longer than for a combustion or hybrid vehicle, which usually takes around 80 days. The situation is improving a bit, but it still takes over 3 months to sell a used electric car. Despite reports of rising demand, used electric cars still remain on lots for a long time. Basically, French people talk about them a lot, French people look for them, but French people don't take the plunge. So obviously some models do better than others. A Model Y, for example, finds a buyer in an average of 37 days, which is actually very fast. A Renault 5 stays on average 64 days, and a 208 stays on average 87 days. Basically, the best sellers in the new electric car market are also the best sellers in the used electric car market. Unfortunately, there are vehicles that sell much less well, obviously, for which there is much less demand. And these are the ones that increase this average, like the Volkswagen ID.4, which needs an average of 133 days. And there are some vehicles for which the situation is still quite paradoxical. Since in March 2026, while most models stayed in stock a little less time than usual, there is one model for which the situation is completely the opposite. That is to say, it stays even longer in stock, even though the French are buying a bit more used electric cars. It's the electric Renault 4, which is indeed a flop in the new car market, but is also a flop in the used car market, with an average time in stock that has increased by 10 days during this period, whereas most models, as you can see, have seen their time in stock drop by between 3 and 8 days on average. So used electric cars are selling a little faster than before, even if we still can't really call it a commercial success. Despite that, there's still something that might really worry electric car owners, and that's that prices are continuing to drop. That's the number one problem with used electric cars. When you want to resell them, you have to slash the price to get rid of it, at least somewhat quickly. You might expect prices to rise with stronger demand, but the opposite is happening. That means owners are forced to sell their electric cars even cheaper and lose even more money on them. Among the 10 best-selling models in France, the listed prices dropped by an average of 4% between January and May. One of the hardest-hit models is the Volkswagen ID.4, down 14%. And even with that drop, it still takes an average of 133 days, mind you, to sell it. A Model Y is down 7%, and a Peugeot or 3 electric minis are down 8%. According to La Centrale's market tracker, in the first quarter of 2026, the average price of used electric cars on the market dropped by 9 to 9.5% compared to the previous year. Why? Well, it's explained by several factors. The first is simply that there are more and more electric cars on the used market. All the end-of-lease vehicles, from lease and long-term lease contracts, are coming back onto the lots, but also all those who got their first electric car in the early 2020s, who have now switched to a new generation electric model. Even though there's more demand, there's still even more supply than before. And on top of that, older electric vehicles are suffering more and more each month from technical obsolescence compared to the new models being released. Here's an example with the ID4, a model that has depreciated significantly. In 2020, when you bought a new ID4, you paid around 41,000 euros and got a model with 340 kilometers of range. 5 years later, in 2025, when you bought a new ID4 for the same price, you got a bigger battery with 430 kilometers of range. For the same prices, the new generations of electric vehicles offer much better range, much better charging times, and now also offer 800-volt architectures, whereas their predecessors were still using 400 volts. Basically, as time goes by, first-generation electric vehicles become harder to sell because they're more and more outdated technologically compared to what's available now. There are other brands that have done the opposite, meaning they offer the same thing now as they did 5 years ago, but at a much lower price, which of course also speeds up the depreciation of a model bought a few years ago. This leaves us in a paradoxical situation. Interest in electric cars is growing. Searches are increasing significantly. The government continues to push for electric vehicles with the goal, let's remember, of 240,000 charging stations by 2030. But despite all that, electric cars continue to lose value quickly and remain slow to sell. And that's probably what worries many drivers today, because buying a car is one thing, but knowing how much it will be worth in 3 or 4 years has become a much more difficult question when it comes to an electric model. And if electric cars lose a lot of value on the used market, it's not just because of competition or falling new car prices. Some models still carry very old reputations that they will have a hard time getting rid of. One car that really shows this is Jaguar's first all-electric car, namely the Jaguar I-Pace, which is currently one of Jaguar's best-selling models. It was removed from the catalog a few months ago. It's no longer sold, but it continues to be recalled. Jaguar has just launched a 5th recall campaign related to the risk of thermal runaway in the high-voltage battery. Yes, this is the 5th time Jaguar has organized a recall for the same problem. Indeed, since its launch, this model has accumulated interventions for almost the same reason: a risk of overheating that, in the most serious cases, can cause a fire. In this new campaign, some I-Pace vehicles that had already been recalled and modified by Jaguar to finally get rid of this problem are being recalled again for a rather concerning software issue, because the system might simply not be able to warn the driver when a thermal runaway occurs. Even more worrying, the German authorities, since that's actually where the problem originates, specify that a fire could start even when the vehicle is completely stopped. Obviously, that's the worst possible scenario, a stationary car that still continues to pose a potential risk. Faced with this situation, Jaguar still doesn't really have a definitive solution. So the brand is using a temporary measure that isn't so temporary anymore, since Jaguar has been applying the same solution to the same problems for several months now, namely limiting the maximum battery charge to 90% through a software update. Years after launch, the response remains to limit risks by reducing the vehicle's capabilities. Jaguar is actually lucky that this I-Pace was a real commercial flop, because thanks to that, Jaguar doesn't have that many to recall after all. Just a few thousand units in Europe at most. Meanwhile, things look bad for Jaguar. Land Rover, which explained a few weeks ago that its main goal for 2026 in order to stay financially afloat was to reduce its expenses related to recalls and warranties. Vehicles that had costed a lot of money last year by offering its customers more reliable vehicles. In the meantime, Jaguar still managed to sell a few I-Pace vehicles, whereas it's quite possible that Alfa Romeo may never sell any Stelvio or Giulia models. It feels like these models just might never make it to the market. Indeed, even though for now Stellantis confirms that the Giulia and the Stelvio are not cancelled, they are still being postponed. A few days ago, Stellantis held investor days to announce its strategic plan. They reviewed each brand, but concerns grew when they discussed Alfa Romeo, because among the announced models, among the models coming to the lineup, neither the new Giulia nor the new Stelvio were ever mentioned. An omission significant enough to fuel the most pessimistic rumors. In response to the questions, Stellantis finally confirmed that these two models were still planned, just that they no longer had a confirmed release date, for the simple reason that, for now, Alfa Romeo is somewhat stuck on the development of these two new vehicles. There are two scenarios currently under consideration. The first, of course, is to develop these new models on a platform specific to the Stellantis group, such as the new Estella 1 platform. The second scenario, however, is a bit more sensitive for enthusiasts, because Alfa Romeo would also like to rely on an external partnership to develop the technical base of the future models. Basically, these upcoming Alfa Romeo models could be co-developed with Leapmotor or with Dongfeng, which is another Chinese brand with which Stellantis has strengthened its partnerships, or even with Jaguar Land Rover, since a new partnership has been signed between this group and the Stellantis group. For now, no partner has been officially designated for these future Alfa Romeo models, but the mere fact that this option is being considered still shows that the development of these two models is already much more complex than expected. but above all, really not very advanced. Especially since a few months ago when Stellantis talked about these two models, it seemed to have a fairly clearly defined strategy. Both of them were supposed to be hybrids, and both were supposed to be based on the STLA large platform. A few months later, we find out that in the end, that's not the case at all. And generally, this kind of last-minute strategic change is not a good sign. In the meantime, that's it for today's news. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please show your support by leaving a like and subscribing for future videos, and by supporting the channel through the join button. I'll see you tomorrow for a new week of news. Bye.